Now I'm working a lot less. What I realized in terms of how I was operating before, a lot of the work that I was doing, I was busy, but it was more busy for the sake of being busy, but not necessarily busy because it was moving the needle. Versus now, because I'm taking a step back and I'm choosing to give myself time and own that as my boundary for myself, then I really have to be intentional about how am I maximizing my time and the things that I'm doing within that time that I'm allocating.
Hello, and welcome to the Randall Osché Podcast, where honest conversations take the lead. Each week, we sit down with entrepreneurs, artists, thinkers, and change makers to unpack how they got from there to here and what they learned along the way. Real stories, no filters, lessons earned through experience, so you can take what's useful and leave the rest. Whether you're tuning in during your commute, a workout, or while making dinner, we're glad you're here. So take a seat, relax, grab a cup of tea, and join in the conversation. Now, let's get into this week's episode.
Erica Rivera, welcome back to the show. For the listeners who might not have caught your first episode during season 1, would you mind kicking us off with a quick introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. I am glad to be back, Randall. Just saying, you're one of my favorite people. So just want to call that out. But who I am, that actually is a great question because I've been doing a lot of soul searching recently. But I am a career coach, AKA career strategist. And so essentially, I help people figure out what their next career move is going to be and keep them apprised of what's going on in the job market.
Yeah, well, thank you for being back, number one. And you also happen to be one of my favorite people and very inspiring following your journey and your career online. I appreciate you sharing so much and so often. And your posts and videos are always quite thorough. They're pretty deep, not like just surface level stuff. It's really like a story that you're telling. And I appreciate that about the information that you put out into the world. And along those lines, through some of those posts, I learned that you have relocated and moved your family to Europe, and I think Spain more specifically. And if I'm not mistaken, you're sitting in Portugal right now as you get situated. And I wanted to spend this episode sort of exploring like how that came to be, if that's okay with you.
Of course. Yeah. I'm an open book. So happy to
All right.
share whenever I can.
So I guess a good place as any to get started is, how did that decision come about? Like, why did you and your family decide to leave the US?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. So I will say I'll start with the version of this was in the making. And this was something that we actually had decided several years ago, but didn't actually know how we were going to get to Europe. So my husband and I had decided that we wanted to live abroad. Neither one of us had the opportunity to do so growing up. We didn't get to travel growing up. So it's just more of a, I guess, trying to give our kids more than what we had sort of deal than what we had growing up, essentially an exposure to a different way of life. So we did visit Spain back in 2022 as a family and really enjoyed our time there. And we were exploring different avenues in terms of how to get to Spain. And at the time, it just didn't actually work out the way that we had hoped. And so it was more of a, hey, let's look at 2026, 2027, and let's try again. But, there's a lot going on in our world. It's no secret that there's a lot of changes, especially in the US, that's happening right now. And so we reevaluated our situation kind of on the fly at the end of last year. And we were like, can we make this happen? So I started doing my research and looking through Reddit threads and trying to figure out, like, is this possible? Looking at all of the doom scrolling, Instagram and all of those things. And so ultimately landed on, yes, it is possible. We had actually talked to a lawyer a few years back and we reached back out to her again. And so I asked her, is it possible for me to apply for a digital nomad visa? And turns out, yes, I could. And so then I was like, all right, let's go. So I just decided on picking up my stuff and setting the foundation for my family to come and join me here.
And how many kids do you have?
3.
3. So you, your husband, 3 kids.
Yes.
Does the nomad visa apply to your family as well? Like, is that
Yeah.
okay?
Hmm.
Pretty dope. I mean, one of the questions I wanted to get to later was how it came to be and the time frame. So you started pondering this, I guess, prior to 2022, took a trip to Spain as a family, loved it, and then you're like, we need to make this happen on a permanent, semi-permanent basis, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It was one of those like lifelong dreams, is what it
Yeah.
was. And ever since my husband and I, like when we were dating, however many years ago now, 13, 14 years
Yeah.
ago, we were like, one day we're going to live abroad. No idea how we're going to get there. There was just one of those like, we'll figure it out as we go. And then to your point, we went on the trip kind of thinking like, okay, we may actually be able to make this happen. But then it kind of got shut down, but we finally did it.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Congratulations. I mean, that's a big moment. I know that there wasn't sort of like a slow burn to get to this point.
No.
You were then planning on like 2026, but was there a moment that made you expedite the thinking of like 2026 to maybe I'll talk to that attorney now and see if we can do that in 2025?
So, my decision, what prompted the expedited process? We saw there were a lot of changes that were taking place very rapidly in the US and changes that didn't necessarily align with our values. And so, we decided that at this point where we are currently at, if we could make it happen, then we would make the jump. And essentially, we decided that we would look into it. And if we got the green light, if the signs were there, we felt if it was easy, for us to make it happen, then we would go forward with it. And basically, from the time we reached out to the lawyer to the time that I hopped on the plane on January the 15th, it was very seamless and we were able to make that transition happen. And so we knew for us, we felt like it was the right time.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things I'm sure I've talked about on the podcast before is there's a book I read a while ago called The Nomad Capitalist, and talks about various points and themes, but one that really stuck with me, which was probably one of the main themes of the book, is go to where you're treated best. And I think it's one of those things that we always sort of know that you can move throughout the country, the state, the world, you can move across the city, but for somebody else to like validate that for you and say, you can go to where you're treated best. You can explore going to places where you're treated best or places that more align with your principles and values. I think that's an important reflection to have.
Yeah, for sure.
So regarding Spain, when you went there in 2022, I've been to Spain like several times. I recognize for myself, I think the lifestyle in the places I've been in Europe more closely aligned with how I would choose to live my life. And I value, I think, more closely what they value as far as lifestyle goes. But maybe if you could explore some of those themes for yourself and your family of starting in 2022, what did you start to recognize when you were first visiting? Like, oh, this place is, maybe it was like school for your children or just a different cultural experience. But how did your wheels start to turn starting in 2022 that like this could be the place that we come to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for us, a lot of it stemmed around the family dynamic, just because, to your point, we have kids. And so when we make decisions right now for our life, my husband and I, a lot of it is based around our kids. We have to make sure that we're putting them in an environment where we feel like they can grow and thrive and be happy, have what they need in terms of that emotional stability, but then also exposure to life and being able to see life in a different way. That was one of the big driving factors. And specifically in Spain, what we noticed while we were there was that things are a lot slower. And granted, I will say I still struggle with that right now, just because I'm like, let's go. And that is not how things work. And so I am very intentionally having to slow down. And that was while we were there as well, slowing down our pace. It wasn't just like, okay, move on to the next and the next and the next. It was like, let's enjoy this moment that we're in. Even everything from eating and going out and having dinner, it was like that was a whole 2 hour kind of span versus where in the US it might take us an hour, sit down, we order our food, we get in, we get out, and we're gone. But it's a slow process of like people coming back to check on you or the food coming out. But then it's being able to have conversations with each other and actually enjoy our presence with one another. So that was a big shift and something that we really noticed. But also, I think too, just looking at the access to resources as well. So one of the things that we recognized and a lot of people were telling us is that there are a lot of healthcare benefits. So here in Europe, you're not necessarily having to spend an arm and a leg to be treated. You have, your set doctor, your set hospital, and people get to know you. They get to know you as a person. So it seems like there's a lot more, it's not as transactional in some instances. And I think that for us was really big because we're very big on community. And so being able to settle down kind of in a place where we can have that community is really important to us. The schools as well. So specifically in Barcelona, that's where we were looking initially. And the schools are highly rated in a lot of the areas there, being able to have international schools and seeing people from different cultures. So it's very diverse there, and we want our kids to have that exposure. So those were some of the things that we noticed, but we also had to get used to some of the things that maybe for us, we didn't think twice about, but coming from kind of the outside into a new culture was like a no-no being there. So there was a little bit of culture shock too, I think, as well.
Maybe what were some of those culture shock moments?
Like the day I was wearing sandals and I got like all of the looks and flip-flops, and I guess apparently it's not a thing. So it was very uncomfortable. We went to Madrid. My son was wearing shorts, and I guess that was problematic as well. There was also the time that we were on the train, and I guess you're not technically supposed to eat on the trains, and you can actually get fined if you eat on trains. And so we actually had this little lady come up to us and was like, no, no, no. And we're just like, okay, well, we're like starving here, but I guess we're not eating right now because you just scolded us. So just things like that. The time when you actually eat is a lot later. Siesta, people close shop, and that's a thing. Sometimes you don't know when stores are actually going to open because they might advertise being open on Google, but they open when they want to open. So those were some of the things we quickly recognized.
Growing pains, but all good ones. When I was first in Spain, I've always heard of siesta and the Spanish, but I never thought through that or thought it was like a real thing or didn't apply to like modern society. But then my first day in Spain was like, they really do close down shop and they really do close restaurants. And I think one of the things that naturally aligns with me, speaking of lifestyle, is for years now, even before I visited Spain, I would always eat dinner later. By the time I got done with like my day and going to work, coming home, maybe exercising, taking a few moments for myself, I would eat dinner around 9:00. And my family were like, oh, you're eating dinner late, or like, oh, we didn't want to call you because we didn't want to interrupt your meal. But there, it's normal. That's fine. And I think just, again, understanding how you live your life, might be different for where you're at, but might be aligned with how a different culture like lives theirs. And I think it's always worthwhile exploring that. I was also in Barcelona when I realized I was looking like a very American tourist, and I was wearing Ray-Ban sunglasses, but I don't know, they're very maybe sporty looking or something. And I was like, I need to do something to change up this look. So I went and like, while I was out and about and walking, I went to this sunglass place store and I asked the lady for some help. My guidance to her to help me was like, I need to look more European. pick out a pair of glasses for me that's going to help, me fit in a little bit better.
Yeah.
But all good stuff. So have you settled on Barcelona, or are you still in the process of finding out which area in Spain is going to work best for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So not Barcelona. We actually, we had put a deposit down on a home we thought was going to be it. But part of the challenge of coming from the US is and when I say they, it's really dependent on the agency. But if you're working with real estate agencies, a lot of times they do not want US bank account information. They want things like transferred over. So the currency has to be in the account in Spain. Any like pay stubs or things like that, they want that all translated into the Spanish standard. So that actually didn't work out for us, but it was in a town called Blanes where we were looking, which is like an hour 15 north of Barcelona. So we're still trying to stay in like the general vicinity, but that was where we were looking because it's a smaller town. So we figured, well, it'll be easier for us to kind of integrate and just kind of get settled. And then we can decide if we want to move elsewhere in the next 6 months to a year.
Which reminds me, another thing that I think is important from my experience there, and you touched on it earlier, I want to circle back to it, is community building. I think I'm not an expert on this, but experiencing a lifestyle in, say, Portugal and Spain versus in the United States, older cities, smaller streets, more centered around walking than driving. And that's for various reasons. United States is huge. So things can be spread out. So they are spread out. And if you walk to the grocery store every day, that would be the only thing that you had time enough to accomplish, because it would be like an hour walk back, an hour walk there, an hour home. But if you live in Barcelona, or if you live in like Madrid, or if you live in Lisbon, you can walk to anywhere you want to go. And I think that helps build your community, because you run into your neighbor that is at the cafe in the first floor of your building, or at the, little grocery store that's around the corner, that you aren't driving to like some supermarket every day where everybody from your town of, thousands of people is using, and you're not having to bump into your neighbor, right? That's my theory anyways. But I do think that culturally, and how the lifestyle they have in Europe helps facilitate community building. I do believe that this is relatively well spoke about and written about, is like that doesn't exist in the United States. You have to be very intentional to supplement your community. And what I mean by that is you can't just live your life and expect to have it. You have to join a group. You have to join a church. You have to do something in order to make that happen, which is fair, but that's how it works here. In my time in Spain and Portugal, this just kind of organically happens because of the way you live your life. Is that something that you've noticed? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with you 100% there, especially I would say like going to Blanes, because I spent about a month-ish there. It's very community based. Everyone walks everywhere. You have your local shops that you go to. People were already getting to know me, waving at me, hello, because I would walk up and down the same streets, go into the same stores, to your point, same cafes, walk along the beach, and it's like you see the same people. And it is very community based and driven. And because people do tend to walk a lot, so you'll see people do a lot of like micro trips to the store, because to your point, they're walking. So, carrying lots of bags is not really something you can do. Is when you have to walk 20 minutes to get to your house or more, but people make it work for them. And even in Barcelona, which is a bigger city, similarly, you have your pockets. And so the places that you go to, people get to know you. And then even on like the transportation, because a lot of people take public transport. So you'll see people on the trains or the buses, and you'll see the same people traveling and commuting. And so you get to know the people that are around just because of your kind of routine that you have. But it is very much driven. I would agree on like the aspect of community, and people do take the time to say like hello and stop and talk. And sometimes like I'm over here like, okay, y'all are talking great, I'm gonna just try and bypass y'all. But it's nice to see, that people engage with one another.
Yeah, people meet on public transportation because Europe actually has public transportation. Another thing that the United States is awful at.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, if you don't mind sharing, like, how old are your kids, and do they recognize what's happening? And if they do, are they like stoked about it?
That's yeah, we're working on that. So we
Okay.
have 7, 9, and then my oldest is 19. So
Okay.
my oldest was actually going to stay behind, and he was going to go to school in the States, but he decided that he actually wanted to come and join us in Spain and, just experience life in a different way. So we're actually looking at school for him, because he's really interested in languages now and wants to learn how to speak all of these different languages. So there's that aspect, which I'm really excited about for him, just being able to have that experience. But for my daughters who are 7 and 9, my 7-year-old, she's kind of like, just put me by the water and I'm okay. And, she's pretty much fine and just kind of like living her own best life. And she does get a little bit shy because they don't speak Spanish yet. And so that part is hard for them. My daughter, my middle one though, she's loving Barcelona. Like that is her vibe. Like she's like out there walking down the streets and like she knows where everything is. And but she too, just I think with the language is the hard part, is being able to communicate. But the nice thing about being that age, I feel like kids are really great about, for the most part. I mean, granted, like I know I recognize that not all kids are the same, but from what I've experienced with my own kids is that they have done a really great job of acclimating to the environments that they're in, finding friends quickly, and being able to integrate themselves, so I think they are good about that. And so that's where I think that, yes, there's some culture shock. There's, foods and there's snacks that they're not going to be able to get now, things like their comfort, but overall they are leaning into the experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think that's like probably better than be expected. Like I was waiting for some like, something more dramatic, but like that's awesome. Like that's
Yeah.
And like they're kids too. So I think that they'll adapt quickly. Kids are much more elastic mentally and physically than us old adults. And like I think the purpose that you mentioned earlier of exposing them to things that you weren't exposed to, I think there's going to be like a minimal amount of growing pains now, but the benefit to them is going to, like, the return on investment for that challenges and the pain that they're going through now is going to be astronomical for the rest of their life. I know that's tough to explain to like a 7 and 9-year-old, but they'll certainly going to appreciate this experience and that you did this for them when they're older and they begin to realize it.
Let's take a quick break from today's episode. If you're enjoying the conversation, take a second to like, follow, or subscribe wherever you're tuning in. We'd really appreciate it. You can also find us on Instagram at Randall Osché. That's RANDALLOSCHE. And check out more at podcast.randallosché.com, including show notes and other resources from today's episode. All right, back to the conversation.
Is there anything that maybe some of the snacks for them or experiences for them and that you miss about the US that you didn't think that you would miss?
I miss having a dryer.
Yeah.
Say that I miss having a dryer. And granted, that's like there's bigger problems that one could have, but I will say that I'm one of those people that I love pulling out warm clothes or blanket and just that's my thing. But it's okay. We're hanging up clothes. That's fine. But that's one shift, I should say. And then for my kids, one of the big shifts is in swimming, like the swimming classes that we've been able to find. Swimming classes are now in the ocean versus in a swimming pool. So that's been an adjustment. And then like dance class, which is another activity that they both wanted to be part of. So the dance classes look different. So it's more of they're getting that true kind of cultural shift where they're learning some like hip hop and some of like what would be considered local to us in terms of what would be standard for what we would teach in the States, but they are also learning. I'm blanking out on the name of the dance the traditional dance. Is it the fado? No, it's not the fado, is it?
That's Portugal.
Is that Portugal?
Like music is Portugal. Like fado is traditional like Portugal music, so it's also a traditional Portugal dance. But
clearly, I'm confused.
I'm not gonna try to pronounce the names of the dances in Spain, but
they're learning it. That's different for them, but they like the little like the dresses and the little like being able so that's different. In terms of food, definitely it's been an adjustment because they are very much big on like their Rice Krispie treats, and the snacks here and the pastries look a lot different. So they're having to adjust to just having different types of food. And then there's certain fruits that maybe they wouldn't necessarily be able to get over here that they got, like the melons that they got in the States. So that's been a little bit of an adjustment for them. But outside of that, I would say also just like some places where you see a lot more elevators here, I feel like, because of the way they build up. And so a lot of the like apartment buildings and other structural buildings will have elevators. And so for them, that's actually a big shift because they're used to climbing up a flight of stairs or just being on one floor. So they think that's actually pretty cool that they get to go in and out of elevators now. So
yeah. You were talking about your daughter's learning dance, and you talked about the traditional dresses or garments that they would wear. for the dance, which is another thing that I also recognize the difference between the US and other places I've been is other places have culture and like the United States doesn't. Or maybe that is the United States' culture to like not have one. But I guess a visual representation of how I see it in my mind is that the color palette here in the United States is very bland. And then the color palette in the places I've been in Europe is very vivid. And I
Yeah.
mean that both literally and figuratively. Speaking of colors, like they actually use colors on buildings. But here, everything is some version of like a gray, a blue, a tan. And if you drive through a neighborhood, you're not going to see a pink house or a blue house or that wall that you're sitting like behind you, like that orange color. But the way I think through things, again, I think it's sort of a catch-all of lifestyle, and they just live their lives more vividly, and culture is a part of that, and the United States doesn't have that. I don't have kids, but my gym that I go to is by like a dance studio, and like sometimes when I go to the gym, parents will be waiting to pick up their kids, and they're just wearing athletic clothes, like
Yeah.
that's not a cultural thing. That's just Reebok. I don't,
Yeah.
so I appreciate that about there as well. And like, if you don't know, you don't know, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I agree though. I definitely see the difference. Definitely a lot more colors, and that's totally my vibe. So like I am really appreciative of all of that. And then just even like dress, you talked about the way people dress, that like I've noticed a lot of differences where I'll go out in a sweatshirt like I'm wearing and, leggings, and you're seeing people fully dressed and have like nice shoes and nice purses and things. And I'm just like, oh, I'm underdressed. But I think that's more of a cultural norm, which I appreciate, because it's like people, it seems like very much part of the culture is we dress a certain way, and that is totally fine. It's just different, but it's something I have noticed where a lot of rooms that I have been in, there's been a difference in the way like I personally show up and dress versus other people, and it's not right or wrong. It's different.
Yeah, I remember at the time I knew that Europeans, exactly what you just said, they, I guess, probably take more care, at least for me, take more care in like how they present themselves, regardless of what they're doing, right? If you go to an airport in the United States, people will be wearing pajamas to get on flights or big baggy
Yeah.
clothes. I remember I was planning my airport outfit to be like, something that was comfortable, but didn't make me look like a slob. And it was some form of like tapered athletic pants and a well-fit shirt like this or something. But again, not pajamas. And I thought I nailed it, right? I thought I'm going to fit in with these Europeans. I'm not wearing pajamas. This is a good hybrid outfit between style and comfort. And then it's 4 a.m. No, it's probably like 7 a.m. at the Charles de Gaulle airport. And I'm looking around at these people that probably got up at 4:30, 5 in the morning, and everybody is gorgeous. Everybody has nice jeans on or dress shoes or suits. And I'm like, what is happening? And it's not good nor bad, but I think it's just a good, maybe a pressure check of maybe how we live our lives or how we got to where we're at versus how other people show up in the world. And you don't have to agree or concede that one version is better than the other. But I think it's good to what you're doing with you and your family to broaden your horizons, to at least recognize there's a different way of showing up, right? I would say like not specifically talking about doing business, but like there's a different way of doing business. And I think that's I don't think that I would desire to be at the Charles de Gaulle airport at 7 a.m, like looking fancy, but certainly next time I make that adventure, I'm going to do a bit better of a job of how I represent myself. I'm going to pause for a moment. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to cover?
I don't know. I think some of the things, like maybe just you don't know what you don't know until you're in the process, just because there were a lot of questions that I had like going into this. Like I knew like the first step was I needed to get a visa, and that was really, the deciding factor as to whether or not my family and I were going to be able to stay. But then I think I didn't recognize and realize at first how much more one has to do once you do actually have that approval and permission to stay, that there's just a whole checklist of things that one has to do. And it's getting through that hurdle of, okay, I just need to get, the approval. And now it's like, okay, I have the approval. So now I can look at things like, where am I going to live? What doctors, dentists, taxes and social security and all of these things that was not necessarily talked about. And you don't necessarily realize unless you're kind of in it, or unless maybe you're working with somebody who is going side by side, like doing the process with you. Because I know there are services out there that do that.
Sort of speaking of that, what were some of the biggest logistical steps that you had to take to make it happen? I am currently going through the process of, I have one storage unit in one part of Pennsylvania, and I rented another storage unit in the other part of Pennsylvania, and I live in Florida, and I don't want to move to or not move, but I want to go back to Pennsylvania, which is 1,000 miles away, to move stuff from one place of the state to the other, and I don't want to get rid of it yet. So logistically, just finding people to do that for me was like a big lift as I continue to reside in Florida. But I know that isn't always easy, even if you're in the States, but you've relocated your life elsewhere. I know you're looking to buy a house in Spain, but do you have a place in the United States still? Or did you liquidate everything? You renting it out? What were some of those big rocks that you had to move logistically?
Absolutely. Yeah. So to your point, there were definitely a lot of things that, even now we're trying to figure out, but some of it was, where is all of our stuff going? So storage units, cars, because cars are not coming right now. So thankfully, my husband has a really great friend who's got a lot of land and is kind of doing a rental kind of deal there. But we don't know if and when we're bringing the cars, because there's a lot of challenges with just getting cars registered that are from out of the country. So being able to figure out what is that going to entail. But right now, that's not something that we're worried about, because we're just trying to figure out what are the essentials, and then we'll kind of backtrack and then move the other pieces. So that was something else. Then also animals, having to figure out, because we have dogs that have very severe anxiety. So being able to find the appropriate arrangements there. And then also house, so I wanted to sell. My husband did not. So we decided to keep the house and, rent it out. But then, of course, you have to have someone local that is going to be able to help and maintain. So again, thankfully, my husband has a really great friend of his that is acting as a property manager. So that works out really well. But for some people that don't have some of those, I guess luxuries is the best way to call it, being able to have those resources as readily available and accessible, I would say it's really, again, not a right or wrong on how you approach it. It's what's the best situation? What's the best outcome for you as the individual making the move? Because I've talked to some people here that have made the move and they've literally just sold everything, and they came and they're starting completely all over again. They didn't want to have to deal with storage units and all of these other things, versus on our end, we decided to kind of hold off on that. So storage units, keep the house and things, cars and all of that. And then we're going to figure it out later.
Yeah. I'm moving storage units, not because I'm moving anywhere, but I'm just saving $300 a month.
They can be pricey.
So expensive. I wish I would have done it sooner. I don't know why I haven't. But anyways, has this move changed how you think about what matters most in your life?
Absolutely. 100%. I would say the biggest thing is that, especially moving from working in corporate to being my own business owner, and that for me has been a big transition. But what has been really challenging is the grind of it and working a lot of hours. So I will say, working myself to the point of burnout, where now making this shift, I'm really taking a step back and I'm saying what is really important, and looking at the people that are directly in front of me and being able to say, for me, that's family. For me, that's, being able to be with them, to create that time and space, versus my whole day passes and I haven't looked up to grab a drink or have a bite to eat, because that's how I was operating, because I was so focused on, I have to build. And that hustle kind of grind mentality, where now being where I'm at now, it's really giving me the chance to take a step back to really analyze at this stage of my life what's more important. And then my dad had a stroke as well, just not 2 weeks ago. He had a stroke, and for me that was very eye-opening too, in two ways. One, I'm not close, I can't just hop on a 2-hour flight now and go see him. It's not that easy anymore. But then two, also recognizing that the fact that I've been so in the grind of things that I haven't given myself the time to just be present. And so that's been the biggest life shift for me, I think. And then really being able to reevaluate how I want my life to look moving forward, essentially.
Do you think, or maybe it's too soon to tell given like your new outlook, do you think that with taking time for what's most important to you now and getting out of sort of that United States hustle mentality, that you're as productive or as impactful as you would be if you put in more hours? It's just that it gives you perhaps a better perspective on what are the highest value activities that I need to get done. And like all this other stuff is, yes, it would keep me busy, but it wouldn't produce results. Sort of like the 80-20 rule.
That's exactly it. That's the biggest shift from what I'm realizing now, because now I'm working a lot less. But to your exact point, what I realized in terms of how I was operating before, a lot of the work that I was doing, I was busy, but it was more busy for the sake of being busy, but not necessarily busy because it was moving the needle and actually benefiting me, the business, versus now because I'm taking a step back and I'm choosing to give myself time and own that, as my boundary for myself, then I really have to be intentional about, well, how am I maximizing my time and the things that I'm doing within that time that I'm allocating? So to your exact point, yes, that I have very much seen that be a huge shift, but I think for me in the best way possible, because I don't know if I would have recognized that otherwise if I had not made this type of move.
And I think you're surrounded by it in the United States. Like you're surrounded by a culture of hustle and capitalism. And I think, from other cultures and other countries, they might not have as many opportunities as the United States has, but that doesn't mean they're great opportunities. It just means there's an abundance of them. And I think that it's not uncommon. I was talking to somebody from, I think maybe Ecuador. I like to have conversations like this. So it was just like on the street, I met this lady and, we got to talking and I asked her like what some of the biggest differences would be. And she was talking about how she had 2 jobs in the United States. And I think that that's not uncommon to have 2 positions in the United States. So that's unfortunate because your lifestyle, you're sacrificing something for those things. So while there are an abundance of those opportunities, it doesn't always mean that it's great. However, depending on what part of the world you come from and from where she was from, she wouldn't have even had the opportunity to have multiple jobs. And if she did have multiple jobs, she still wouldn't have been able to meet her financial needs. So it was, a blessing to be in the United States and to have 2 jobs to be able to meet her financial needs, put food on the table for her and her family. But the downside of that is it's a hustle culture and you have to adapt into it or you're going to get left behind in the United States, which this gets into another topic that we're going to breeze past for now of like the inequality of all of that. I guess as we get close to wrapping up, if someone happens to be listening to this and they're on the fence about moving abroad, what would you want them to know or what would you tell them to give them a push to make the decision to do it?
Yeah, this is a good one. So I would say, first and foremost, one of the biggest reasons I would say for myself why I decided outside of what I discussed earlier, which is, changes what's going on in the world, but just loss in my life. I lost my mom a few years back, and then it's like seeing other family members pass. And so I'm recognizing that time doesn't stop. And so I think for me, the biggest push was that realization of this is it. Like I get to choose how I spend the rest of my life. And one important factor for me personally was I wanted this to be my reality. And so if someone's on the fence, especially if you're one that maybe this is something that you've dreamed about, for however many years, or you're at the stage where maybe it's not something you've dreamed about for however many years, but because there is so much going on, you're really wanting to make this a reality for you, for your family, whoever it is for, I would say do it, because you can always come back. You don't have to stay. So that's one thing, is recognizing that none of these decisions have to be permanent, but it's just a matter of making the decision and committing and doing it. I would very much say, yes, I'm all for if you're on the fence, if you see the pathway and you can, do it, because you can always go back if you do not want to stay. And that might be a situation where you do put your stuff into storage and you do hang on to that house or things like that. So you do have that pathway. That would be number one. But then I think for people who maybe don't see the possibility for them, because that's the other side of it that I hear a lot of, it's like, I don't see the pathway. There's a lot of different types of visas that people don't even realize exist. And so it may not necessarily be through work, but being able to explore what other visas are out there, whether it be through your lineage, whether it be maybe you go back to school and you go on a school visa, or there's like a skilled workers visa where they're literally trying to get people into the country because of the skills that they have. So there are different pathways out there that do exist. Specifically, I would say if you're like flexible about location. So I would just encourage you not to give up on that. So I think those would be the two things that I would say there.
Yeah. 2 points. One, my first trip abroad, I went to the United Kingdom and I had a friend that like booked everything. I just paid him for doing that. I just went with a group of friends. One of the friends booked it and we just reimbursed him for that. So I wasn't privy to hotels or flights or anything. I just showed up. It was awesome. But then like while we were on the trip, we were all, this is awesome. But then we started to reverse engineer the math of how it got there and look at flights and how can we plan to come back. And having not been exposed to it, I was in my, I think, late 20s, early 30s when that happened. But having not been exposed to international travel earlier in life, I always thought there was a higher barrier of entry, that it was more expensive than what it was. And as you're just talking about it and you're talking about visas, just even traveling to Europe, the barrier to entry isn't high and it's not expensive. You can get a direct flight from Boston Logan International Airport directly to Lisbon, Portugal. It's a 6-hour flight and you can probably find it for like $400-$600 depending on what time of year you want to go. You can't get a flight in the United States from state to state that border each other sometimes for like that much money. So
Yeah,
the
mine
barrier
was
of
200.
entry,
The flight, one-way flight that I booked to get to Spain, it was $235. So to your point.
that was awesome.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that later. But the other one is like regarding visas, and I've looked into this a little bit as well. Like same sort of thing. The barrier to entry there is not astronomical. I've looked at them for mostly Portugal, but like there's various types of visas and the requirements aren't ridiculous and it's pretty affordable. And I think they have realistic requirements as far as like what you have to be in the country. So
Yeah.
I guess my final point here, and I'll shut up because this is your episode,
No,
is
you're good.
I remember I had a podcast last year with Alexander Terry. He owns a boutique hotel with his wife, and sort of the same theme of when is the right time. And after having that conversation with him is like the time is always now. There's never going to be the ideal moment. You're never going to have all the resources in place. You're never going to have as much money as you'd like to have to be as financially comfortable as you would want. The right moment isn't going to come. So the right moment's always now. If this is something that you're thinking about doing, go ahead, do it. Figure it out.
Yeah.
So yeah, the time is now. Erica, I appreciate you being on for the second time and sharing your story with us today. But before we sign off, maybe just a quick update of any sort of big projects you're working on. And if people want to follow the content that you put out, where's the best place for them to go find you at?
Yeah, absolutely. Big project. So I'm currently in the process of writing a book right now. So that's going to be a mid 2026 finalized product here, because it'll probably take me to the end of the year to write. So that's coming out next year, and it's for mid-career people that are like in the process of that, being at the crossroads, trying to figure out what is next in their careers. That is who it's for. So that is one thing. And then the other thing is I'm currently doing some work with Glassdoor and partnerships there in terms of doing advising work there, and now hosting workshops for other agencies as well. So that's more on the project front. And then in terms of where I can be found. So a couple places, LinkedIn, Rivera-Erica is one. And I am also on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, where you can find me at Career Diva Coaching.
And we'll include all the links for those in the show notes if people are inclined to go find them. But Erica,
Amazing.
thank you again so much for coming back. I appreciate this conversation. I know it deviates a little bit from the usual course of conversation here, but I think that, we weaved in and out of the themes that are most important to us and for the people that probably following along as well. So again, much appreciation for you coming here and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you for having me, Randall. It's always a pleasure. So appreciate you.
And that wraps up today's conversation on the Randall Osché Podcast. Thanks again to our guest for sharing their time, knowledge, and lessons with us. If the episode brought you any value, the best way to support the show is to follow or subscribe on your favorite platform. That helps us reach more people like you. You can also visit podcast.randallosché.com for blog posts, full transcripts, and other episode resources. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and keep moving forward.